Greetings, YouTube. So, as my gift from my wife for Valentine's Day, she took me to see an art display at the Currier Museum of Art, which is a nice little museum. If you ever get a chance to go to it in Manchester, New Hampshire, I recommend it. It has a nice little collection, and it even has access to one of the buildings that Frank Lloyd Wright made. There are two of them in my town. One is open as a museum, and the other is still a private residence. Interesting places. Lloyd's homes, beautiful works of art. They fully belong in a museum collection. Not what you'd call really livable, in my opinion, but really, really pretty. Now, as this is my present, it was a display called Lethal Beauty, which dealt with arms and armor of the Japanese people. The early stuff up through the age of gunpowder. The early gunpowder, I should say, matchlocks, things like that. And it was quite nice. I've seen larger collections of, for example, the Higgins Armory in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is quite possibly the best armory in the United States when it comes to arms and armor. And the Museum of Fine Art once had a display which showed off the single most beautiful physical object I have ever laid my eyes on, which was a tanto blade. And my friends actually had to physically drag me away from the display because I couldn't take my eyes off of it. But the display here in Manchester at the Currier was quite good. It was quite pleasant. And while I was looking at it, they were showing off, of course, a nice sampling of different types of weapons that are traditional to the Japanese samurai. And one of them, there was a really nice large arrowhead. I mean, it was an arrowhead like this long. It could have quite easily passed as a knife blade, a dagger blade. It was a substantial device, and propelled by a large bow with a decent shaft behind it. It would have done devastating amounts of damage. Though the idea of firing such a beautiful object at someone as a fire and forget weapon was kind of mind-boggling. But in the collection was a naginata. Now, a naginata is a type of polearm, and it could be best described to people who have never seen one as you take a wakizashi, I'm going to say that word right, wakizashi blade, which is the smaller of the two traditional samurai swords carried. If you take one of those and put it onto a pole about 7 or 9 feet long, you would have roughly a naginata. Now, the naginatas themselves actually tend to be a lot more graceful than that. They are a slight variation to the traditional blades carried by a samurai. But in essence, that's what it is. It's a wakizashi blade attached to a pole. Polearms are remarkably like that. Things attached to sticks. Daggers attached to sticks. Axes attached to sticks. Forks attached to sticks. Hammers attached to sticks. That's what polearms are. They're modifications of other weapons or farm implements turned into something that lets you hit someone when they're way over there and you don't want to be close to them. And in the display, they had blurbs for all the different things, describing what they are and stuff like that. One of them was interesting because it compared two different sword blades, one from World War II and one from the 16th century, I think it was, or 15th century. And it was remarkably how similar they were and remarkably how different they were, at least to my eye. The geometry of the blade tips in particular was vastly different. I thought that was interesting. But in the little blurb that they were talking about the naginata, which again is it's a graceful slashing weapon. It's a thing of beauty. They said that to give context, essentially, so that the people who, because they didn't have the shaft, they just had the blade. To give an idea to people what this was and how it was used, they made a comparison to a European polearm. The idea being that a European audience, which is essentially what Americans are, we're descended from European stock. And our most common references are going to be European arms and armor from the Middle Ages, the whole King Arthur thing and stuff like that. To have a reference, they discussed a European polearm so that you could then take the idea of the European polearm, the idea of the Japanese naginata, marry them in your mind, and then you would understand how it was used. Which is not necessarily a bad thing to do. It makes perfect sense. However, they chose a European polearm, which I thought was sort of completely and utterly inappropriate. They chose the halberd. Now, a halberd, for those that have never seen one, is a spiky bit attached to an axe blade, and they often have a back spike or a back hook, which was for swinging them to get more power, to get punched through armor, or pull someone off a horse, or things like that. Hook a shield, things like that. Halberds are the Swiss Army knives of polearms. But a halberd is a poleaxe with things attached to it. A spiky bit at the front for stabbing, and a spiky bit in the back for doing whatever you wish to do with that spiky bit. A naginata is a slashing weapon on a pole derived roughly from a sword that has some utility as a thrusting weapon, not so much. The naginata really is a slashing weapon. And also one of the few weapons that were practiced by women in the Japanese culture, because they could use it from the top of their walls in defense. And in fact, one of the grand masters in the world, I don't know if she's still active, but she was the last time I had read about it, is a woman, a grandmother, because naginata is still a martial art form which is practiced. And that was a completely and utterly inappropriate comparison, because naginatas and halberds are not the same at all. It's like comparing cats and dogs. Yes, they both have fur, and they both have 4 legs, but the comparisons begin to break down after that point. Yeah, they're mammals, okay, but, they have different lifestyles, they have different behaviors than each other. So, that was horrible. And I was kind of disgusted that people that are curators of a museum made that comparison. Now, if they had compared the naginata to the European glaive, also a weapon of grace and beauty, which is a slashing weapon, slightly better at stabbing things because it's straighter than the naginata is, but it has a nice curved blade, also derived from, farm implements of some variety or other, you would have been much better off, because that's exactly what a naginata is. It's the European glaive, or you could say that a glaive is a Japanese, naginata. You compare the two, they are utterly and equally the same. It's kind of like comparing the hand sickle and an Asian kama. Yes, they're both farming implements used exactly the same way. One-handed implements for cutting plants. One is not more exotic than the other. They are the same. But the comparison of a naginata to a halberd was nuts. It made no sense. And it kind of distressed me that people who should know better, they are museum curators and historians, made that connection. Maybe they thought that Americans wouldn't understand what a European glaive was, but we have this thing called pictures. You could have just shown a European soldier with the glaive and a Japanese soldier with the naginata, and you would have completely and utterly cleared that crap right up. But they didn't do that. And I was baffled by that fact. I didn't bring it up to them at the time. I was enjoying myself and the display and looking at art with my wife. But I did feel that I had to talk to someone about it, and you folks get to be it. So this has been me waxing quixotic about polearms, which is probably really boring to most people. And I'm sure that anyone who doesn't like polearms will have skipped this particular video today. But those that didn't, thank you for watching, and I would love to hear your thoughts on polearms in general, or have you ever encountered a really confusing comparison like I did?